Hi there. Welcome to today's EDI Insights with Raise the Game. Thank you for everyone tuning in right now. We really appreciate it. And we have such great content and amazing lineup for you today. I won't be on the screen for long. So I am Dom Shaw, EDI coordinator at Yuki, who manages the Raise the Game initiative. So today, through this series that we call the EDI Insights with Raise the Game, we explore EDI research within the games industry that we wish to bring more attention to and just get out to more people to see and take a look at, but also to meet the minds behind these amazing pieces of work, to kind of see highlights from their perspective, but also to see applications of use. And we do that specifically with an array of panels made up of amazing industry figures, both new and experienced. So I am very happy for the content you're about to watch. So to kind of introduce and get the ball rolling, please let me introduce you to the stage Caroline, who is one of the research minds behind this amazing report, who will present the findings and highlights of the study.
All right, I'm taking that everyone can hear me now. Thank you very much, Dom, for allowing me to take up the stage at the very beginning. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today on this fine evening. My name is Carolina. I go with they, she pronouns, and I'm going to be introducing today to you this little presentation on our report that we managed to put together. So as Dom has very kindly introduced to us, we have, together with Anna and with the support of Yuki and the University of York, put together a report stating the current insights on the diversity and inclusion in informal video game learning spaces. This report has been published by Yuki, and we include in there a couple of interesting guidelines that we would like to share with you all today. So essentially, based on the way that the video game spaces are happening today, excuse me, we wanted to first analyze and define what a video game learning space is. We understand the informal video game learning space as any space that allows the development of abilities and excuse me, of abilities and any my apologies, to allow the development of abilities that will help in the video game development. So for example, these can include meetups, game jams, and are not associated per se with any institution that might be a further education institution. Therefore, they are a good way of allowing a commencement in a video games career without the need of any formal education. Because of this low entry point, they are also a good way of bringing in different perspectives and different identities that might not usually engage with video games, and therefore they are a good way of introducing new talent to the video games industry, which has been proven through reports and literature, which we have used in this report, to be a thriving, very strong industry that has very different people that are part of it right now. Even though it is one of the most diverse industries within the creative industries, which include film and television, of course, there are still problems with how we can diversify and how the industry itself behaves with people who might not fit the status quo or the identities that are usually more expected to be in there. So even though my apologies. So
you're doing amazing.
Sorry, it's just Anna, if you want to join in and pitch in on something, I'm very, very sorry. Just basically we essentially, Anna and I think Anna want to introduce my very incredible supervisor during this project, and the one I was very lucky to work with. We worked together on this project, and she so please, if you can.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm very sorry.
No, no worries. I think it's always, scary to be live. What we would like to present today, basically, is our research based on basically reports that were published by Yuki, that you can find them on the website right now. And we're thinking about, informal learning spaces in the video game industry. So thinking about all the spaces where people can exchange knowledge, can find contacts, can find, networking opportunities. And these events can be in a different shapes of form. They can be, game jams, they can be workshops, they can be big conferences. And within the spaces, we're thinking about, how to bring more people, how to bring more diverse voices, how to bring people who are marginalized, who are not represented in the spaces. And, in order to do this, we basically, talk with organizers of different events. To find out, for example, like how they approach this issue, like to know something from the practical experience of organizing these events. And it's also worth remembering that our research is not the only research out there talking about informal spaces. There are lots of other researchers focusing, amazing researchers focusing on this issue. For example, taking a closer look at game jams and how to organize them, or workshops. So it's also worth to look more broadly than our research. So I'm bringing this to your attention right now. But in our research, we focus specifically on organizers, like what they want, what kind of problems we have, because it is actually hard to organize a good event and bring people together and make the spaces inclusive and open for everyone. Yes, Carolina, are you ready for next part?
Yes, we can continue now. Thank you, Anna, for jumping in and helping me out on that one. So based on this literature that we have analyzed, and also taking in the feedback and the content of 22 interviews, some of the participants from which are participating today in this panel itself, we put together a report that we wanted to put forth in a practical way. Therefore, as much as it is important to analyze the theoretical perspectives of diversity and inclusion in video games, we wanted to create something that could be useful for more people, that could be used by a variety of event creators, and that focused on accountability and on the intersectionality of the people who might participate and who might be part of these events. Therefore, since events, of course, are very complicated and have a lot going on in that the various factions of the event all come together as a whole, we wanted to highlight a series of bullet points that eventually would go forth to create the best practice guide. So some of the categories that we talked about with our interviewees would be the organization act itself and the emotional labor that goes behind putting together events, who the event is for, how the event is advertised and how it is handled within the timeframes. For example, whether it is hosted on the evening or throughout a couple of days, keeping in mind the different people who might want to participate in it. The location of the event, for example, keeping in mind the transportation of people who might not be living in the capital city of a country where the event is being held. That might also frustrate the capacity of other people, of attendees, to go to particular events. And among many other things, of course, which we could go on for the entire hour that we have today, we do highlight ideas and concepts and issues that might not usually be spoken about in events and event organization, therefore reiterating the need of, for example, in the various quotes that are included in the report, the need to speak with very different people and those people from very different paths in life. So once again, having the ability to read exactly what other people have had their opinions shared about, and putting these ideas together in a very specific, more cleanly put together way, allows for the distribution and for the sharing of these ideas in a way that can also be used in very different situations. So of course, we cannot create a one-size-fits-all report, but we can, in a way, start a conversation about these topics and ideas that might help diversify the video game learning scene. So in a way, being able to have the input of many different people and then combine all of these ideas has been really fruitful and has allowed a lot of very interesting conversations, which we want to further go a little bit deeper into today with the help of our panelists. So of course we have Anna here with me, who has very kindly helped me out in that moment of terrible panic. And along with me being able to introduce this amazing report that we have managed to put together, we have the help of Alex King, who is the community manager at Ripstone Games, as well as Dan Bernardo, the founder of Playthrough Games, Kate Edwards, the executive director of the Global Game Jam, and Leon Killing, who is the EDI of Sumo Games. So thank you very much, all of you, for being able to make the time today to join us in this little conversation that we're going to be having.
Thank you.
Super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. The report was so interesting to read. I can't wait to get stuck into sort of talking about it.
Yeah, we have managed to prepare a couple questions that we would like to share with all of you with regards to the report itself. I believe, Anna, that we've had them in a spreadsheet. I don't know if you have it open right now, or I think we have them shared. So if you want to go ahead and start firing away.
Yeah, I was, thank you so much for joining us, and for participating in the research project, and for reading report. And for the first question, I was just wondering, what are your reflections, basically, not only on the content of the report, but basically on the state of events right now within the game industry? This kind of warming up first question, very broad. So if you have anything to share to start discussion, that would be great.
I don't mind offering a few thoughts on that to start with. I've been in the industry for almost 28 years now, and to see the evolution of events, and not only just the nature of the different events, going from, we have obviously some landmark events that everyone looks forward to, like Gamescom and GDC and all that kind of stuff. But then the plethora of smaller regional conferences that are not only more geographically focused and culturally focused, but also thematically focused on different demographics and representation, that we've seen a lot of those come up. Of course, I'm excluding the COVID period, but we've seen a lot of that, those kind of events come up and be generated over the last 10 years or so, which is super encouraging to me. But the more important thing too is the fact that I think at the events, when you go to these events, the level of representation we're seeing in the industry, at the events themselves, is super encouraging to me, because I remember the days back in the 90s or the early 2000s, where you walk into a woman's restroom, for example, at GDC, and it's empty, and now you see lines out the door, which I'm just like, yes, this is a good sign. I mean, it's not a good sign, but it is a great sign, actually. So I'm encouraged by that. So I think a lot of events, at least on one level, the inclusivity of the people who are attending is far greater than it was, I would say, even 10 years ago. But of course, there's a lot of other socioeconomic barriers to attending these events, which is a pretty serious issue, which is, in my estimation, it's one of the benefits I think that did come out of COVID is the fact that so many events were able to pivot to a virtual format and will continue some kind of hybrid format going forward, because I think the accessibility that it enables is tremendous.
Yeah, I think I can just jump in. I keep saying that I'm new in the industry and I have to stop doing this. It's like 3 years now. So when you stop being new, but I think it's great to hear, you know, Kate's perspective, because coming in, you know, relatively recently, I have this feeling that this, you know, that is not enough. Is not enough, and I think Kate agrees with me. But I think not seeing the evolution of this from a few years makes me a bit more, you know, skeptical about it. The one thing that happens to me, and in the very beginning of my career in games 3 years ago, I actually started creating small events for people like me. That was how I felt like I would be able to be, you know, included if I create my own event. Is how narrow-banded the events concerning minorities or any diverse group are sometimes. When you talk about our problems but don't talk about more technical things, we don't teach each other. You know, going as LGBTQ person in an event to hear about LGBT issues is great, but sometimes it would be great for me to know a bit more technical things to make me actually enter in the industry. So I feel that's, yes, I can actually feel changes in the last 3 years. I think the conversation needs to move a bit away from, you know, the problems that are very, very obvious, and start focusing on solutions, like practical solutions.
Leon, Alex, anything to add?
So I ramble, so I was waiting for Alex.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I kind of got into the industry through small events and an event that I was running that, fortunately, I'd like to believe at least was very inclusive because of the nature of it, because it encompassed sort of a community based around YouTube celebrities rather than what comes naturally from sort of our industry events, particularly from game studios or very focused events. We really had this great mix of people from different backgrounds and different characters. But even then, there are definitely elements that I would have said when we were creating it, we didn't understand in the first year or maybe even the second year. And what's kind of exciting about this sort of report and the way that we're moving with it is the idea of having guidelines for people like we were at that point to be able to set something up with those things in mind. Because particularly as a small group or someone who might not necessarily think too much about it going in, having it at the forefront of your mind when you start and not thinking of it as something that needs to be added, I think is so important. So yeah, it's really nice to see it move that way. And I hope that it'll continue to move that way.
Yeah, I think I'm similar to Dan. I need to also stop saying this, like being fairly new to the industry, because yeah, it's been about 3 years now, which if you believe various reports, 3 years in, you are halfway to being a veteran in this industry, because burnout is unfortunately so prevalent that, you know, people, you know, statistically leave within 5 years of joining, which is perhaps another tale for another time when we feel particularly demoralized. No, but I think for me, one of the things that's been kind of interesting, my previous life and career was in higher education. So conferences and sort of academic events, I feel like have done some of the things in terms of accessibility that games events are only more recently starting to pick up on. So things like, if there aren't gender neutral spaces, kind of creating them for an event, you know, making sure that pronoun badges were available, making sure that they were accessible venues, and, you know, various bits and pieces. Which is not to say that all academic events are fully accessible and they don't have a long way to go as well. But there were certain things which I think were more present in the sort of organizing sort of ground level that games is only just picking up on. But I think one of the things I didn't realize before joining games was how very ingrained events were. So I didn't realize how integral things like game jams were, or how integral things like, just conferences were. I didn't realize there was massively different tiers in terms of access, in terms of economics. Like, what's a GDC, and why do I have to be a millionaire to go to it, or have a massive company to pay for me to get there? Which, and realizing like, oh, that's where a lot of the kind of cutting edge thinking and thoughts happen. Oh, but then whose voices get to access that? Who gets their plane tickets paid for? Who gets their hotels paid for? Who gets to, picks up the bill for that really expensive ticket? Because when I saw them, I went at the time. Because at the time, for me, before I was working at Sumo Group, I was a contractor, consultant, and so I was working, for various different companies, but for myself. And very, very early on, I was like, "Ooh, that's scary." And then there are game jams where you have people who are running on fumes, trying to run things that they love out of because they're passionate, and you go, are you just living on coffee? Please eat something better. And it's finding the balance between how important these sorts of events are for the networking, for the knowledge sharing, for all that, but also how they're accessible, and how we become a more conscientious industry more and more and more. Like, I think it's fascinating hearing Kate's assessment of the state of things, which I can relate to in a different world from when I sold games for about 10 years at GameStation as a woman. And that entire experience of coming up with games for my first 20 years as a woman, and now as a man, the way people treat me at events is different. It's fascinating, and sometimes good, sometimes less good. So I'll stop there. Sort of rambly thoughts.
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing your reflections, and here also when we're like trying to put this research together, we're thinking, well, how we can make this practical, how people can make this applicable, because as Carolina presented in her presentation, the quotes, like, okay, we can produce the research, but how we can move forward, and can you see any application of this research, or you think maybe something's missing, what else we can do on top of this?
Okay, sorry, I wasn't on mute. One thing I would say is that that is, even without any other thing, just in the vacuum, research like this are very important because they formalize, and formalize is the first step in normalize. So we always have the feeling, at least in our bubble, in our peer group, that the fight is over, and it's just about going and gradually going to the point we want to. But there's already a big backlash on the progress that's been made in the last years. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh no, I can't hear about this anymore," and why is this important? So having pieces of research that say, this is the best practice in making this become a normal, normalize this across the industry, I think this already on itself, it's already a great thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the research and evidence of any kind of evidentiary based, content is really, really important to back up what we're trying to do. And, that's been one of the hardest things, is when we have statistics around demographics of the industry. Like, that's something I did when I ran the International Game Developers Association. We created the developer satisfaction survey, and we collected a lot of demographic data because we want to know the diversity of our industry and have some sense, so that we know where we are, and basically what the mountain that we need to climb in terms of improving inclusion in this industry. And so anything like that is useful, especially if it can draw insights from the community. One of the things that we do in the Global Game Jam, for example, is once the jam is done, and it is a large event. So the event we did here in January, even this was our second COVID influenced event, we still ended up with about 33,000 people in 100 countries at 680 sites, both virtual and live sites that participated in the Jam. That contrasts with our 2020 numbers just prior to COVID, which we had about 49,000 people in 118 countries at, I think, over 900 sites worldwide. But after we do a survey, or excuse me, after we do the event, we do a survey of the participants and ask them all kinds of questions about their experience, about who they are, and we get incredible information out of that. So we have an understanding of essentially this huge cross section, tens of thousands of people participating in the Global Game Jam, most of whom are people coming into the industry. They tend to be students or people earlier in their careers. And it's great to see that, we have seen over the years that the level of diversity of the participants has continued to increase. Of course, diversity as it's defined both globally and, of course, by locale. So when we look at things like in some of the Middle Eastern countries, we see more and more women participating in the event. I've often been on site at a lot of the Global Game Jam sites. So I was really encouraged when I was in Egypt, for example, a few years ago for Global Game Jam. I would say probably at least 25%, if not a third of the participants were women, and there were all women teams participating, which I thought was just awesome to see and not expected. I did not expect that in that locale. But I think the main thing, the only other thing I wanted to mention is I think one of the things we really need to try and capture through the research is the overall impact. So how are these events really affecting the individual? What is it doing for them? And that's one of the things we introduced in our survey this year for Global Game Jam, is to basically invite people to tell us their story. So how has this affected you? How has it influenced you? Has it helped? Has it not helped? And it's been this incredible treasure trove of anecdotes and personal stories. We have over 1,000 that were submitted to us of people who were affected by the Game Jam in a way that we just never expected. And I mean, I'm saying in a positive way. And it's incredible to see. And the stories just run a very wide range of positive impacts, including people who found their life partner during the Global Game Jam. So it's just really cool to see. And I think we need to keep capturing that aspect, the overall impact on people of any event. Like, what's the impact of people on what's the impact of going to GDC on people? Well, I don't think that's really codified anywhere. It'd be great to kind of get somebody to do a survey or do some kind of, I know GDC does a survey, but I'm saying, a third party to kind of indicate, did it really help you or not? And that kind of thing.
It's a showdown. Like, one of us is going to go, Alex. I'll do it. So I think one of the things about reports like this one and like kind of collecting that data kind of going on is one of the things that I would hear frequently from sort of studios and organizations and as clients would be but what do we do? And like we know there are these problems. What do we do? And reports like this, like, here, and like not in a kind of like a lazy way, but in a very clear, backed up research. Like, here are the issues. Here is what you can do. And it sort of starts to my mind at least, it starts to erode the excuses why we can't. Like you start out like, oh, we'd love to do this, but it's like, why don't you? But we'd love to do that. Well, why don't you? And so we get to a place where the reasons to do it start to well outweigh the reasons not to do it, and it starts to lose credibility. Where it's like, well, we would like to, but no, here it is. And okay, you might not be able to do all of them because of location, because of finances, because of resource, because of etc. So those kind of very, what I'd consider the hard restrictions that are just sort of beyond your capacity. But there are always smaller things to do. Like using, I referred to this earlier, but they are like, do you have spaces on badges for pronouns? So that when you have those name badges, it's very clearly there how you refer to people. Whose networks are you targeting? Like, are you just saying, hey, white people, come meet more white people for the white industry that's very, very whiteness? And or like, how are we addressing things in terms of physical accessibility, digital accessibility, all these kinds of things that don't take massive budgets and don't don't detract from or rather don't add additional work to what is already organizational work, which is just part of running an event.
I think all I can really do here is riff off what Leon said and kind of say, if you can do a report like this, and pretty much everyone who was interviewed at some point in that said, I don't feel comfortable with some element of the events that I've been to, then there's still work that needs to be done. And when you're then framing that in terms of, here are the steps, there are things in there that are, I think if you read it once, you would come away and go, that's so easy to implement. Why on earth have I never thought of doing it? And just taking those easy steps and making them available. As I sort of said before, sometimes in ignorance, people just don't think of these things. And to have those immediately accessible and in front of you, that's the way to go, right? That the more we can do that, the better off we will be as an industry.
So thinking, about this, and when we were creating, this study and, talking with people, you realize there are, obviously so many events out there and so many different types of organizers, right? So you have a huge events, like everyone knows about, extremely expensive, but you might also have really tiny event when organizers are not paid for what they do. They just try to establish community, or they just try to open, basically create space, for people they know, or people with, specific lived experiences. Do you think, these guidelines apply to different types of events? What kind of things are missing? Because, we have a problem that, okay, we try to make them as broad as possible, but there's so many different ways you can organize the event that, some of the nuances or very specific practical things we just needed to remove, because they were so specific, for example, to Game Jam, or very specific, only to the huge conference, because no one else will have the money for security or other things. So we need to figure out how to present it. So what do you think about this in relation to size of the events or type of the events?
I think as far as there cannot be a one size fits all, like you rightly said. It's just not viable. It's not possible. Not only in terms of scale, but also need. What the event is for. However, something I do think that sort of shows up in the report, and I think is really crucial to sort of draw out as a couple of points. One is to do with baking inclusion and accessibility into the creation of the event, because if you kind of get to the end and you've already booked the venue, and then you go, oh, but it's not actually it's all stair access, oh no, oh well, never mind, then it's not on your radar and sort of part of the lifeblood of creating that event. If it's not there in the core of the organizing sense of construction, then it's always going to get left behind. So I think on the one hand, there's that sort of, it has to be genuinely at the center of the creation of the events. But additionally, I think the other thing that's really sort of key to draw out is thinking intersectionally. It's having this awareness that if you are, whatever the size of your event, that some things will overlap with different communities and different spaces and different folks who are coming to your event for whatever reason, and how these different communities might be impacted by certain spaces. So I will call out a venue, not to shame anyone, but I'll call out a venue that I like very much. One we've got in London, the Tobacco Dock, which is a beautiful venue, very historic. It is a pain to get to. It has one lift. It is mostly stairs, and historically, it was part of, as the name suggests, the tobacco trade. So it also has a history of bringing tobacco through from plantations in Virginia. So it's not just about considering the venue in terms of its accessibility, but also in terms of how it impacts other folks who might come along that don't share histories that some of us do in the same ways. It's about that kind of conscientious, as I say, that these are kind of two parts of the same coin, of really being careful and conscientious as part of the process of setting up an event, which is just part of organizing. That's regardless if you're making a 5-team game jam or you're renting the Marriott hotel in some big American city and inviting the entire developer world over, game developer world, obviously. Those are the kind of two sides of the coin that I think are scalable at all levels.
The only thing I would also add to this is that many times those recommendations, they work a bit much more as a reminder than anything else, not necessarily a shopping list, because we are all, no matter how forward thinking we are, no matter how embedded in trying to solve the problem we are products of the generation that created us. We came ingrained with biases that we don't even know they are there, and sometimes we are not being not using malice. We are just following our priorities that are not necessarily in line with a more open and inclusive event. So having this as a reminder where you can say, okay, I have to think about those things, it already has a lot of value.
I'm going to sneak in here instead of going last. So I think the barrier that you're always going to run into, particularly with small events, is that people are going to talk about cost. In the entire time that I was running my event, we pretty much made a loss every single year. And the more we opened up and made more spaces available, the more loss we made. And so I think people will always see that as a potential issue. Now, as Leon was saying, sort of thinking about it from the beginning, you start to take those spaces into account. You're not suddenly having to book a floor with another set of bathrooms to make them available to other people if you've got that baked in from the beginning. But there was another part of the report which I thought was really relevant to this, which was making sure that you're accountable and transparent about that. And so for those small events where you can come out and say, hey, we have this space available, but it maybe doesn't cover these needs. It may be our event has quite a lot of standing up. It has quite a lot of queuing. So, if you need special accommodation for this, either you could contact us beforehand, or maybe it's not, maybe we've just not quite made the correct accommodations. Obviously, at that point, there's been some sort of failure. But then talking to people individually, finding out what those needs are, by being transparent, you can patch holes, even in the sort of last instance. Not the ideal, but taking it as a whole picture, there are opportunities to, even as small events, make up for shortcomings.
Yeah, no, I would just add to that. I mean, all fantastic comments. I mean, I think what I've seen is that, yeah, the scalability of the issues and the logistics are obviously quite different, especially when it comes to accessibility issues and a whole host of other issues. That's one of the things that we implemented at Global Game Jam, is we have an accessibility fund that is provided by, or basically it's a fund that is created by our sponsors. I mean, we created the fund, but the sponsors supply the funds, and different sites around the world can apply for funds for all kinds of reasons. If they need a sign language interpreter, if they need, because the jam takes place in the Northern Hemisphere during winter, in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the height of summer. So, some sites may need an air conditioner so that they can actually, jam comfortably in a room, or places may need a temporary wheelchair ramp and things like that, so that we can make those accommodations. But we leave it to the site organizer to basically come to us and appeal and say, hey, this is what we need. And our job is to make those funds available so that they can basically do what they need to do logistically. One thing, though, that I think is a common thing that kind of, I think, riffs on Leon's point, which I thought was great, was that there is a commonality across all the sites, regardless of the scale of them, regardless of what their different needs are, is that every site shares the exact same code of conduct. Every site shares the same code of inclusivity. So basically, it's a pledge that they do need, that the site organizer has to sign and agree that this site is going to be inclusive. We are not going to turn anybody away unless they violate the code of conduct, in which they're actually disrupting the experience for other people at the site. So we always have those as kind of the common denominator across everything, because that's essentially our commitment, that this event is open to absolutely everyone, and so nobody will ever be turned away. If there's some other reason that, obviously violates the other code. So having that as the foundation upon which we build all the other sites, I think has been really helpful.
Yes, exactly. When we were talking with other participants of the study, trying to make this kind of, still relevant, but open for, redefinition, iteration, and, trying different things. So every organizer we talked with, they were just like, yeah, you will make mistakes when you organize events. You will realize that basically you excluded someone, and you will need to reflect on what happened, and you will need to improve next time. So there will be mistakes, but mistakes are not the reason to stop trying to make something better. And that was really, really nice in a sense. So thinking also when we're doing the study, we conducted the study during pandemic. So there's all lots of discussion about what we can learn from online events and how, apply these learnings, after pandemic. What do you think about this? Because, suddenly all in-person events basically shifted to online spaces, and, how this impact our thinking about, inclusivity.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in. I guess I'll go first this time. Because this is something we saw directly with Global Game Jam, because when I first took the role in 2019, I was told by the board of directors that we do not do virtual sites ever. The Global Game Jam experience is all about being there live, working shoulder to shoulder with your other colleagues and teammates, and building this thing together, which I agree is in an ideal world without, global viruses, it is a great experience, and it's really fun that way. And that's the way it's been for most of the life of Global Game Jam. But of course, like every other event, we had to figure out what we were going to do. You either pivot or you just don't do it. And that really wasn't an option for us, for all kinds of reasons. So we basically had, like every other event, just had to figure out, how do we pivot an event like this? How do you do a virtual game jam? Because the dynamic is very different, when you have a team that is dispersed across geographies. I think today that's pretty common. You see a lot of indie teams who are dispersed all over the world, and they do make fantastic games regardless. But that wasn't the norm 5 years ago at all. It's like that's a pretty recent phenomenon. So we pivoted as a result of that. And, we did a all virtual jam in 2021. And then for this year, we allowed a hybrid format. So basically we left it to all the local organizers. The current rules in your locale, so you tell us what you want to do. And some sites even decided to do hybrid, so they had a live presence, and then they also did some virtual component from their specific site. The result of that, though, was just tremendous open door to a lot of people who gave us feedback saying, now I can finally participate in the Global Game Jam because it's virtual. Because for all kinds of reasons, whether it's an accessibility reason, socioeconomic reason, like someone else mentioned, how, the expense of traveling to a city to participate, it's just not viable for so many people. And so we were just incredibly encouraged to hear that, it took the pandemic to make that punctual change to our format. But now that is always going to be the format for Global Game Jam, is that the sites will get to decide how they want to conduct themselves, but they can do virtual or hybrid or live. It's really up to them. But we're encouraging sites to be flexible in that way, because you just allow so many more people to participate who normally could not, for all kinds of very valid reasons. So I think it's a really good thing moving forward.
So I have to say that when this whole thing started, I was ready to be a bitter hater of online events. I was like, I don't like this. I like eye to eye. I like hugging people. I was like ready to be a beta hitter, and I've been a beta hitter for a few months. But thanks the heavens, I managed to be able to, more objectively look at the great advantages and how open and inclusive things become when you go online or hybrid. I think I still very worried about an online event, but for different reasons. It's about accountability, it's about attention, it's about all the toxicity. Okay, I'm not going to say this word. I just gave up. Coming from the online environment to our safe spaces, but I think I'm kind of a newly converted, and I think that the horrible things that came from the pandemic, this is not one of them. I think was a very positive shift.
I think for me, it's the big push is the socio-economic sort of element of it. I mean, you should be able to offer an online ticket, particularly if you're a panel or workshop type event. Everyone and their mum knows how to Twitch stream these days. If you can't find someone, if you don't have someone on your team who knows how to Twitch stream, I'm sure they know someone who knows how to Twitch stream. And even then, you can take stuff, you can put them on YouTube, you can release scripts online, and it allows people who maybe can't afford the £7,000 GDC ticket, or the particularly, and this is, I think, often overlooked when people do pricing on events, the accommodation. Hotels are a fortune to start with, and once they get suddenly booked up by 100 developers, they don't put the prices down, that's for sure. But yeah, there's so many opportunities to just get more people involved. I know I personally, given the opportunity, will never leave my house. So having the chance to just see all these really interesting people on stage and learn from people across sort of the world who maybe just at these events that you just never would be able to go to, it is really awesome. And just opening your event up. I mean, with my event originally, we had sort of 2,000 people coming to it in person. The next year, we put it on Twitch, and it had a 30,000 person attendance. It's a win-win. It's a no-brainer for me. But it's great. The hybridization is brilliant.
Yeah, I think I agree with it. One of the things about I'm kind of similar to Dan. I'm like, when we went into lockdown, I was like, no, but I've just quit my day job and I was getting ready for conference season, and no, what do you mean I can't go meet people again? Because there is, for me, there's a very particular energy that this industry has that I don't think any other industry has. It's full of, I'm not going to discount that we have problems. We got a lot of problems, but we also have some of the most energetic, creative, hilarious people I've ever encountered anywhere, and it's a fantastic and unique experience to be around that energy. Like I always leave on such a high, and so when that was something like, oh no, it's gone, I was likewise very like, will this be what will this do to that energy? And I think it's changed, and not in bad ways. Like it change is not inherently bad. Like it's different, but it's different in so many great ways. And I think the hybrid options are like I was saying, a win-win. Like if you're in a position where it's safe to do so, we're starting to kind of get the opportunity to see folks again in person, and there should be no reason why the developer talks or the talks that are hosted at these events in person cannot also be streamed, and they cannot also have a Q&A that's open to the world digitally. I think one of the things that on the kind of other end of this now is the unexpected experience of going to develop Brighton this last October, and realizing that my capacity for peopling has diminished. And actually, talking to a lot of folks who did events, have traveled a lot all the time, suddenly going, I'm too tired and going home early. Like actually, I can't. I've been inside too long, and I didn't realize how exhausting this was. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. If people recognizing their limits and going, you know what, I've hit my limit. I'm going to go home now, and going to bed. And I think we should go to bed sometimes and just rest a bit, because we are an industry that works hard, through either unethical crunch or just self crunch. Like I'm really in the zone, and I want to keep going, and then you look up, you go, oh my god, it's 3 a.m, and so the kind of the opening up of different options, and people also understanding their limits and understanding what they are and aren't willing to do, or when they hit that wall, I think is actually really valuable, and I hope has more effects in terms of setting good, healthy boundaries for ourselves.
And Leon, just add a little thing is that is add value and extra is about the database of knowledge that we start creating, because I've been to many game events where I got such amazing talks and other things that was just lost in the ether. And now I'm just able to rewatch it, and I'll be able to see it again and share with other people. So there's such a great advantage, especially for people normally don't have access to.
Okay, I mean, thank you so much, for all your comments and definitely, this is important into thinking how to incorporate, online capturing of events or online events, because they allow, more people basically to attend or create, knowledge for future viewing. We have one question from audience. So the question is, I was wondering what areas of EDI the panel think the industry should look to next for this level of research and focus.
I think from my perspective on that question, and one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind is with the issue of EDI is expanding it to the broadest possible definition, because I know a lot of the issues I deal with, like in the culturalization work I do every day, as the other part of my job in the industry, is we do a lot of focus on gender representation, ethnic representation, which are all extremely important, but there's also representation of cultures, of geographies, of religions, of all these other things that not only are represented in the games themselves, but also within the in our working environments too. And I think a lot of people, for some people, those factors are somewhat implicit in terms of the makeup of somebody, because it's like, well, yeah, you happen to be from Ukraine, or you happen to be from wherever. But I think it's important because along with that, it's not just about our gender or lack of gender. It's not just our ethnicity or whatever particular background we have. It's also all of these factors make up who we are. They all shape our worldview. They all shape our perspective and how we integrate into teams, how we integrate into companies, how we interact with other people in the industry. And so I just want to see us continuing to be more mindful of that broader definition, because I see people who are struggling, for example, who are in emerging markets or in areas where socioeconomic disadvantages, where there's a huge divide there. That is certainly part of the EDI question and part of that issue that is less addressed in this industry that I've seen. I mean, it has come up a lot in this discussion, especially around access to events that are expensive, which I think that's kind of an opening, kind of a tip of the iceberg to that issue. But I would love to see more research done along that area.
So I don't know if of course, I'm very interested in the subject, but the one thing that I'm trying to bring to our game development is something that Kate said is very, very interesting to me, is how the use of religion and the use of cultural backgrounds have been made as it's very hard for you to actually understand how games are made with those elements in them. They normally are completely mindless about how much it impacts and how much it means to these people. So there are many games that are amazing, and they would be great if you could reach out people in different parts of the world. They will not reach out because they're just not made in a way that is acceptable to people of those regions. So having this kind of awakening in game development is something that I find very interesting, because I feel people find this limiting. I cannot do whatever I want, which is absolutely bullcrap. Because if you know a bit more about a different culture, you have so many more options to to do a great job. So I love to see this being introduced to the teams a bit more about the awareness of the themes that you bring to your games.
Alex, I'm out. I think I agree, like with both Kate and thanks, Tasker. Shush, very serious panel. Where was I going with that? I think as an industry, I think as far as like content is concerned, the content that we create, I do think there is a bit of both. We are both an industry which is incredibly cutting edge in terms of what we do in terms of interactive media, in terms of what we do with storytelling, in terms of what we do with just visuals and engagement. And at the same time, we are an industry that is quite scared to venture into what we call controversial topics. And I think, I think it's not just about representation of diverse characters and so on. I mean, if we just look at the new Horizon Zero Dawn, like the comments that people leave, like, oh, why is there a woman in my game? As a mate, like, why, there's these kind of, we still have very backwards, or not backwards, very resistant, a lot of resistance just in terms of what we can present players. And it's not just players, players are our creators and our creators are our players. And so it's not like, oh yeah, it's just the gamers TM. We are the gamers TM as well. Yeah, but it's also that sort of, it's not enough to just have one or two games that feature a woman protagonist or a Black protagonist or a trans protagonist or these sorts of things. Because in those instances, what we also find is it doesn't satisfy those audiences because it's just not enough to go around. I will use the example of Don't Nod's Tell Me Why, with a trans male lead. And people are like, oh, have you seen this? Have you played this? Like, yep. It was good. It was a great game. It's not actually what I would gravitate to normally as a player. And I was like, yeah, this is fantastic. But I personally didn't need that as a game. There are many, many people younger than me, perhaps earlier in the transition, and et cetera, who would need that. But it's currently one of the few options as a AAA title. And it's like, well, what else could we be making if we didn't just have one or two games a year from the big companies? What would this industry look like if we had a lot more stories to tell? And how many more interesting, complicated stories could we tell if we weren't so scared?
Okay, so thank you so much. We don't have more questions from the audience, so so for the ending of this panel, we have last questions. So if you would like give one advice to a person who wants to organize the events, what would be this tip or advice be? Like, if you could pick like one thing that people should keep in mind when they want to organize events.
I'm going to steal the best one, I think, from this panel that came up time and time again, which was start your event with inclusion in mind. Start from the very moment that you start setting it up, just have it as one of your focuses.
I'm going to agree with that, and sort of move on a little bit and sort of say when you do exactly that, it has this kind of chain of events that takes place as a result of that. You change the different faces at your events, which in turn changes the different contributors you have on the discussions that take place at these events, which in turn change the the links that you're sending, like, hey, I saw this talk, which then enters into the discussion of the industry, and it changes the viewpoint of who can join the industry, which then changes the different projects we output. So not only keeping that sort of inclusion at the core in mind, it's also thinking about how that ripple effect works. And if you want to see our industry continue to be as cutting edge and amazing as it is, the events that you put on absolutely contribute to that bigger pipeline.
I don't know. I think my only advice is, on top of all people say, once you have all this in mind, go ahead and do your event. It's very hard to do. I know it's very hard, but it's worth it. There's no such thing as too many. There's an audience for you if you're bringing something new and fresh, or if you're bringing something that's important to you.
And I think the last thing I would add to all these great points is I would just say that if you're going to be running a virtual event, which is probably going to have people participating from across a lot of different locales, just be mindful of the fact that not everyone speaks the same language. If you're going to have a code of conduct or a inclusion policy, make sure it's translated. Have a few languages available, at least some of the broader languages like Spanish, French, Chinese, and so on and so on. Because it does matter, because the lack of localization of some of your baseline guidelines for your event is instantly exclusionary to a lot of people. And you also want to think about too, and these are just some of kind of the geography 101 things, but the language issues, and also think about when you're scheduling your event, is it going to potentially conflict with, is it during Ramadan? Is it during the Lunar New Year? Things like that, where it's an event that affects a lot of people across a larger geography. So just be mindful of that kind of thing, if you're planning a virtual event or even event in a certain area. But usually the local organizers, they know this already. But I'm just saying, for a virtual event, you want to keep these things in mind, because it will directly impact how many people are willing to participate, because it's really you, basically, that's you either being exclusionary by accident. So you want to be, inclusive by intent, by making sure you think about those things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for all the comments and suggestion and tips. I think it's really fantastic for us and for our viewers. And again, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the panel. And yes, thanks for watching. And if you want to know more about the study, it's available on Yuki's website. So if you have also any questions about the research and you would like to talk more about them, you can contact me or Carolina directly about the content of the report.
There's also an abridged version that you can find on gamesindustry.biz on the academia side of the website that has basically a bit of a boiled down version of the report with like bullet points. So if you want to skim read that before getting into plunging into the big pool of all of the ideas out there, that's also a good read that we have out there. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Really from the bottom of my little potato heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care out there.